Buying Sweden's new GRIPEN E fighter will run you more than buying a new F-35, but if you ask me, the GRIPEN E is still the best bang for your buck fighter in the world today, even if the F-35 is the better jet. And I'll explain why. Picking up a new Runway Queen F-35A today will run you between $82 and $83 million, whereas buying a new GRIPEN E will run you about $85. But while the GRIPEN E does come with the steeper sticker price, it also comes with a significantly lower operating cost and a design philosophy that allows for extremely efficient use of these fighters. So let's take a minute to talk about what makes the GRIPEN E so special, because if you just look at its performance specs on a sheet of paper next to other 4th and 5th generation fighters, it doesn't necessarily stand out from the crowd. It's not the fastest or the most powerful, the most aerobatic, or the most technologically advanced fighter on the market. But what it is a broadly capable aircraft that was purpose-built for the exacting needs of the Swedish military, which, it's important to understand, represents a very different developmental environment than American jets like the F-16 or the F-35. American fighter designs, after all, benefit from decades worth of massive defense expenditures compounding year over year, not to mention the largest and most robust support infrastructure in military history. Sweden does not have those same advantages, but had the very same concerns about a very aggressive Russia, except for Sweden, that aggressor was parked right across the Baltic Sea. Sweden started its preliminary design work for the GRIPEN back in 1979, and it first took flight in 1988, placing its development cycle sort of square in the middle of America's transition from high-powered 4th-generation hot rods to stealthy, sensor-fusing, low-observable aircraft like the F-22 and F-35. And to some extent, the GRIPEN's design sort of reflects this changing philosophy. Its delta wing design does allow for a fairly small radar return, while its overall small size and weight allow for pretty respectable performance. Initially, the aircraft was intended to serve as either a multi-role or swing-role platform, the difference being that a multi-role aircraft could fly air superiority and attack missions in the same sortie, whereas a swing-role aircraft would need to land and be rearmed to switch from one job to the other. And the GRIPEN A that was ultimately produced was not without its own issues and headaches. There were a number of setbacks, including crashes along the way. And by the time the GRIPEN C emerged, it had matured into one of the most broadly capable multi-role fighters on the planet. In fact, back in 2006, when Sweden and their GRIPENs participated in their first ever red flag large-scale air combat exercise over the United States, GRIPENs emerged from their first day of exercises with 10 wins and 0 losses. In another red flag exercise held over Alaska, one GRIPEN pilot ultimately took down 5 separate F-16s. And in the Loyal Arrow exercises held in Sweden, a single GRIPEN pilot at one point took down 2 F-15Cs and left a third one scrambling out of there. Now, that's not to say that the GRIPEN will always come out on top against the F-16 or especially the F-15, but it's important to note that the GRIPEN can stand and swing with the best of them, even aircraft like the Eagle that are world-renowned for the air superiority mission. Now, this is possible thanks to a very efficient and well-thought-out design rather than brute force performance. The GRIPEN C has a lower thrust-to-weight ratio than the F-16, but boasts the same top speed of Mach 2 and can actually climb faster thanks in part to a more aerodynamically efficient design and its delta wing and canards, making it arguably better suited for rapid intercept missions with Russian fighters so close to your borders. Its service ceiling of 52,000 feet is just about the same as an FA-18 Super Hornet, and its combat radius of about 500 miles without external tanks makes it shorter-legged than the F-35. But what the GRIPEN lacks in hard performance, it makes up for in advanced avionics, and the GRIPEN E takes that concept to the next level. In fact, one could really make a legitimate argument that when it comes to sensor fusion, situational awareness, and even electronic warfare, the GRIPEN E is better compared to the F-35 than any of its 4th-generation peers. Its Raven active electronically scanned array radar is not only extremely powerful, but it's actually mounted on a movable swash plate that can allow it to look to the left and to the right. Now, this is one of those capabilities that's especially valuable in Sweden, where Swedish pilots can be flying perpendicular to the border but still orienting their targeting radar into Russian airspace, allowing them to keep tabs on and, if necessary, even target Russian fighters without ever pointing their nose toward Russian airspace to show their hand. In fact, thanks to this capability, the GRIPEN E can launch a long-range radar-guided missile, like, say, the Meteor, and then immediately turn 90 degrees, but continue to relay radar targeting data to that missile as it flies, thanks to its ability to point its radar to the left or to the right. There aren't a ton of details available about the GRIPEN E's Sandboxx IRST or infrared search and track system, but we do know that like other modern IRST systems, it can detect enemy fighters from dozens of miles away. In fact, if it's on par with the Eurofighter's Pirate system, which it may well be, it could potentially even detect stealth fighters from head-on and as far away as 30 miles, and from behind at more than 50. But what may make the GRIPEN E most potent of all are its electronic warfare capabilities that were designed with Russia's military specifically in mind. Now, a lot of the details about its EW capability set are not released, but we do know that it can not only jam enemy radar, but spoof it as well. Spoofing meaning identifying the radio frequency that that radar array is broadcasting on and then sending it false signals back to confuse it into thinking it sees something that it doesn't. And to that end, one of the capabilities we know that jammer's got is multiple target generation. In other words, sending back signals that trick an enemy radar array into thinking that there are multiple other aircraft in the airspace that simply aren't there, making it much more difficult to identify and target the real threats when you need to. The GRIPEN E also carries towed decoys, not unlike the ALE-55 leveraged by America's Super Hornets, or the ALE-70 leveraged by the F-35. These towed decoys can not only jam radar-guided missiles, but they can turn themselves into juicy radar targets in case a missile is in the air, sacrificing the decoy rather than the aircraft. And if that's not enough, the GRIPEN E also carries bright cloud electronic warfare jammers, which are canisters that can be deployed just like traditional chaff. But while chaff is just a big cloud of metal shavings that creates a big radar return to confuse inbound missiles, Bright Cloud is really a self-contained electronic warfare countermeasure, launched just like chaff, but that continues to use electronic warfare attacks to dissuade inbound missiles. And on top of all that, the GRIPEN E is said to have a very small radar return anyway, maybe 1.5 square meters or even less, putting it not that far off from the outer limits of Russia's Su-57. But all of this technology and capability isn't necessarily unique. You can find similar systems and capabilities in lots of fourth-generation fighters, and certainly in the F-35. What makes the GRIPEN E so special is that it can do all that, and it only costs about $8,000 per hour to fly. Now, to give you a sense of comparison, the F-35 rings in at around $40,000 per hour, and the F-16, which America considers to be a budget fighter, rings in at between $26,000 and $30,000. That means you can operate 3 GRIPENs for the same price of one F-16, and that is really saying something. But it's not just cost that makes GRIPEN E maintenance such a big deal. This aircraft was designed to operate from widely dispersed austere airstrips. Basically anywhere you can find a highway with a 2,000-foot straightaway, you can operate GRIPENs from. And the aircraft can be rearmed, refueled, and given light maintenance by a team of just 10 maintainers, only 1 or 2 of which need extensive training. Compare that to the F-16, which regularly has between 25 and 30 techs assigned to it, and you really get a sense of just how potent the GRIPEN E is, despite its very light logistical footprint. Now, the GRIPEN Cs and Ds that make up the backbone of Sweden's Air Force today, as well as the GRIPEN Es and Fs being built today, are all NATO compatible, and they can carry a variety of weapon systems, including the AIM-9X, and the Meteor air-to-air missile, which I'm on record as saying is likely the most capable long-range air-to-air missile in service today, thanks to its throttleable burn. In other words, the Meteor can fly under power for a longer duration than most other long-range missiles, allowing it to make course corrections later in its flight path than many other long-range missiles can, and that makes it much tougher to shake. Now, these capabilities and more are why many of us argued that the Gripen was a better suited aircraft for Ukraine's fight against Russia than the F-16. But there have been some 4,600 F-16s built to date versus just a few hundred Gripens. So the F-16 became the right choice because there just aren't enough Gripens to go around. If NATO ever did find itself in a conflict with Russia, Sweden's proximity and purpose-built military aimed specifically at the potential for just such a conflict would be a huge asset to the alliance, not just because of their aircraft, but other things too, like their legendary diesel-electric submarines that famously have defeated American carrier strike groups in war games, their armored personnel carriers, and a whole lot more. As a result, Sweden's fairly small but extremely potent military apparatus, perhaps best represented by designs like the Gripen E, really do represent a boon for NATO, not just in terms of geopolitical positioning or diplomatic leverage, but in terms of concrete combat capability. And all of that goes into why I think, despite the F-35 being the better jet, the Gripen E is the better bargain.